Thanks so much, Sarah. I would imagine there are more than a few folks in this room who would be really thrilled to partner with you and also probably have a lot of experience and expertise to offer as you move along on this journey. I'm reminded by, at the Women Leaders in Global Health Conference about 3 weeks ago, there was a wonderful leader from Africa. I can't remember the country right now, but she said, listen, as a woman, demand a seat at the table. If they don't invite you to the table, grab a folding chair and pull the chair up to the table. And if that doesn't work, then sit on the table. And I just love that. And so anyway, words to remember. I'm Lisa Cohen. I am the founder of the Washington Global Health Alliance, ably succeeded by my dear friend Dina Morris, who's here today. And I'm a proud original board member of Global Washington when it started 10 years ago. And Bill, I can only imagine for you listening to Sarah talk today and your vision about how poverty is underlying, so many of the ills that we all face. I'm just grateful for your vision as you thought about forming Global Washington, and congratulations to the Global Washington team today. This is really remarkable, and it's really fun to see this 10 years in. It is my personal privilege to introduce our final panel conversation, I think, for the day. We've gotten a lot of food for thought today, right? And some of the conversations, we can all feel a little overwhelmed and, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? What can we do next? And then thinking about some roadmaps for the future as well. Well, the conversation that you're going to hear right now is from two true visionaries who have given this a ton of thought. And I'd like to invite them to come up now. First of all, Gabrielle Fitzgerald, who is the CEO and founder of Panorama Global, which is a think tank, a global think tank. And Gab works on everything. She headed advocacy at the Gates Foundation for 10 years, and then she ran the Ebola initiative at the Paul Allen Foundation. I was very grateful that she joined the WGHA board, and now she's the board chair, so she continues her work in this community as well to strengthen us all. She sees collaboration as key, and that we have to share information. If you don't subscribe to her blog, you should. She's really thinking about these trends moving forward. She's going to be talking with Steve Davis, who's the CEO of PATH, president and CEO of PATH. Steve is a Renaissance man. He started in tech. He's a civil rights attorney. He didn't start in tech. He was a civil rights attorney, worked in tech for Corbis, was the head of social innovation at McKinsey, not McKinstry, not the plumbing company, and served on the PATH board. And then the PATH, in their wisdom, recognized that when Chris Elias moved on to the foundation, that they had the right person in place to take over. And Steve has been navigating through, as what we all know are difficult funding challenges right now. We have more and more needs, and it's a crowded field. And so Gab's going to talk with Steve about what does the NGO in the next 10 years, the NGO of the future, need to be thinking about. So please welcome Gab and Steve.
Thanks so much, Lisa. It's great to be here for this final conversation on a really fascinating and thought-provoking day. We've heard about the challenges and opportunities before us. We've discussed how we can work as a network to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And we've heard about some positives and negatives in the world we face right now. On the positive side, we heard this morning from Microsoft about the disruptive new technologies that are available to really help accelerate change, and about ideas that we can deploy in our work to increase scale and efficiencies. But there's a couple negatives going on in the world today as well. The world is increasingly complex. If we just look at the headlines in recent weeks, we see a major outbreak developing in the Democratic Republic of Congo, potentially spreading over to the border, 3 countries on the border. We see the rise of nationalism in many countries around the world. This week, it's the Yellow Vest movement in France. And of course, priorities with donors are continuously shifting, which makes it hard for all of us to do our work and stay focused on it. So given the state of the world, nonprofits are continually needing to retool and reorganize and think about how to address all of these challenges and opportunities. And as Lisa said, there's not a better person who thinks more about this than Steve Davis. I think everyone's familiar with PATH, and which is, I believe, one of the largest NGOs here in Washington State. And Steve thinks a lot about how to be an effective NGO in today's world. So Steve, last year, PATH celebrated its 40th anniversary. So you've had a lot of experience and seen a lot of things coming and going. So what's your observations from the past couple of years? What is the state of NGOs globally?
Well, first, thanks, Gab, and thank you so much for inviting us. And it's always such a great honor and pleasure to be part of this community. And frankly, like Lisa said, I'm a friend and a fan of Bill and Paula, and what you all have created in this region is phenomenal, and really kudos for the conference. So for those of you who don't know, PATH is not only one of the largest NGOs in the city, but it's actually one of the largest NGOs in the world, working on global health innovation. Been around 40 years. We work in over 70 countries. We have about 1,500 full-time employees, lots more working with us at any time. Working on 5 platforms of innovation: vaccines, diagnostics, tools and devices, drugs, and then the biggest part of our work is actually system innovation. How do we help support governments and others, communities, to redesign the approach to health delivery or health access or health tool introduction. And that work has continued around the world. About a few years ago, we put together kind of an integrated strategy to try to figure out, given the changes in the world, what we should be doing differently. How do we respond to the donor environment? How do we respond to changing socio-demographics in the world, et cetera? And that's actually been quite successful in the sense that it's resulted in much more efficient approach to the way we deliver services. It's resulted in a fair amount of growth, about 70% growth over the last 3 or 4 years. And really importantly, it means that PATH, as a 40-year-old group, is actually 2/3 of our people, and technical talent and operational talent sit in parts and offices outside of the US and Europe, so really increasingly more and more African and Asian capabilities and talent. And it's resulted in literally hundreds of products and service innovations that have gotten to scale. So PATH actually, quite uniquely as an NGO, reaches about 150 million plus people directly. That's 150 million people directly a year with our products and services. So it's been a great ride. I think we've seen a lot of good stuff happening, but we are now in the business of sort of rethinking what that looks like. We're actually having a board meeting this weekend. Well, we'll hopefully get adopted a new strategy, which will focus a lot more on what we need to do explicitly to reach the SDGs, not just number 3, which is health, but there are a variety of other SDGs that we care deeply about, and particularly how that all translates in universal health care. So then when I think, where are the things that matter and what are the lessons we've learned about NGOs, I would translate sort of backward looking at least, and I can talk more forward looking, but 4 things that really kind of I think about that we've sort of seen and learned. One, and trying to sort of translate these to more broad-based work, is outside of our own sphere, is that strategy really does matter. I think that, particularly in the NGO world, at least me coming in as someone who worked in a number of other sectors and then to lead a big NGO, I was struck by how many much of it was just driven by donor X or donor Y or donor Z wanting us to do X, Y, or Z, and that's good. I mean, obviously, donors are our critical partners in this work, but that we needed to frame, well, what did we think? What was our point of view? What is our belief? What is our mission? And how do we actually want to drive a set of activities and outcomes that may be independent of that donor strategy, or may be something that we'll have to actually go to different donors and ask for, or reshape the way we do our work. So we've actually grown a lot, but we've said no a lot in the last few years because of that sort of strategic focus and strategic orientation. Our goal in our specific instance is to literally be a very close partner to ministers of health around the world in being their innovation partner. When they're actually looking for, how do I introduce, how do I solve a new problem, we want to be a very close partner. And we've sort of defined our customer, if you will, as around those ministries of health and subnational ministers and subnational leaders at the NGO and private sector level. The second thing I think that I've learned the hard way, and I think we're really still figuring out, is that global really means global. I mean that we live in a world where a lot of this is still U.S. and European centric, and Geneva and London and Beijing and now Seattle. I mean, Geneva, London, and D.C. and now Seattle make a lot of rules for the rest of the world. And I think those days are changing, and we need to accelerate that change. And we've tried to move. We've actually moved from about when I came in, about a third of our teams were in the outside the U.S. and Europe. Now 2/3 of our teams are. So we've really been building that directly, more capacity, et cetera. But I think we've still got a long way to go to figure out how to actually reflect that in the way we work, the way we operationalize our work, the way leadership shows up, where leadership sits, et cetera. So we're on very much a journey there. But I think that's the most important thing a 21st century international NGO can be doing. The third thing I would sort of flag just as a lesson is, and I think this is an important lesson for all of us at Global Washington thinking about what we do in the world, is that really inequality and inequity is everywhere. I mean, we are focused, our mission is addressing inequity. In our instance, it's health inequity. But I think the global architecture for global health was developed in the post-war, post-colonial period in the late 20th century, where it was A, mainly rural, and B, in a handful, and actually a shrinking handful, but nonetheless of poor countries. And the reality is the socio-demographics of the world have changed dramatically. First of all, increasingly, poverty is increasingly urban, and the architecture is not built for that. So we have to adapt to that. But also, it's increasingly, there's a lot of countries that are graduating and their GDP per capita in other ways out of the sort of dire poverty of the past. But nonetheless, now we live in a world, the pyramid is now a diamond. And we live in a world where actually the poorest communities in the world are often in middle-income countries. So we have to actually rethink the way we do our work and really think about how do we address vulnerable communities, how do we support low-resource settings in all countries of the world, including our own. So PATH has actually adopted a bit of a different strategy, working with a lot of lower middle-income countries as well as low-income countries, but also even having adjacent programs here for the United States, et cetera, where we think there's opportunity for some of our innovation to help a pretty broken health system. And then the last thing I would say is sort of lessons learned, and is, it's sort of back to basics. And I would say, in our instance, that's two things. It's, it's about people, it's about people, it's about people. And so we've spent a lot of our time, actually shifting talent around, building up new capacity, hiring next generation leaders, thinking a lot about, and we've made some great hires and we've made some really bad mistakes, but, that nonetheless, it's about, really getting the talent in place and continuing to cultivate that talent and promote them and engage them. And I love the people I get to work with around the world. And it's about partnerships. So PATH doesn't do, I joke sometimes we're one of the largest NGOs in the world no one's ever heard of. And partly because we don't do anything with our name on it for the most part. So we have catalyzed hundreds of products, but none of them have PATH's name on them. We don't have a retail brand. We don't have tents in a village with our name on them. We enable those, we support those, we play a behind the scenes role in designing vaccine introductions, but we don't do that work ourselves. So it's all about, can we think about the most strategic way to have creative collaborative collaborative partnerships. And I think, those are lessons that I hope will play it forward pretty well.
Thanks, Steve. I think those are really valuable for all of us. So that's what you've learned in the past 40 years, not that you were there for every one of them.
Although I look it.
But when you look ahead, you've talked about the landscape shifting, the sort of key capitals that people circled between before. You now need to add a lot of new capitals to them. You have significant philanthropic engagement in global health and global development. So what's the landscape look like for PATH for the next couple of years, and how do all those changes affect you today?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I've said this publicly a lot. It feels very Tale of Two Cities-ish right now. And I struggle with that, and we struggle as an organization sometimes, because on the one hand, I have to say, I just came back from a week with some of our partners and teams in Europe, and then the week or two before I was in China and India. And some of the innovation we're working on is more powerful than ever. Some of the products and service ideas, the transformation, the numbers, the impact, the partnerships, I can't be more excited about. And I think that we have huge opportunity and support of others to do great things. But we're also in and so 2017, for example, numerically was our biggest year ever in terms of almost levels of impact, numbers of our revenue. Or 2018 has been a nightmare in many ways. And it's not because that innovation and that, but we're just hitting the headwinds. And they're mostly, we've, of course, as always, a few are self-inflicted, but most of the time it's externalities. So we're now seeing, we're operationalizing in a very complex environment where this sort of the U.S. government policies are changing in terms of funding, in terms of policy issues, which we work a lot in women's health. So those, the Mexico City gag rule has affected our work. We are dealing with a lot of other policy issues, in terms of Brexit, nationalism around the world. I was on the phone this morning for, what are we doing with, the sex trafficking, the human trafficking issues in the DRC, where we have a lot of big presence, and we've just won. It feels like every day it's whack-a-mole in terms of policy challenges. We also are seeing, donor models changing dramatically, and that some of that's been projected, some of it's new, and pivots in that area. We've seen a lot of challenges raising more, the kind of money we've raised in the past just from general philanthropic efforts, that people are prioritizing things differently. So I have to say it's been a rock and roll year, and it's not been very much fun. We've had to make layoffs, and we've done a number of things that organizations do in those times. That said, I think there's coming out of this is there's and it kind of isn't tied into the strategic refresh that we're doing, is that it does focus on a few sort of things going forward. One is, given that I think we are, as a global health and development community, and frankly beyond the global health, we're in pretty volatile times, and I don't think they're going to go away tomorrow. They're regardless of who gets elected president in 2020 or whatever, there is a period here of rocky roads, and we are falling short of reaching our SDG goals based on today's numbers. We are seeing a lot of instability. We're seeing more and more authoritarian nationalism around the world. We're seeing, a lot of other things that are, we're kind of seeing the distraction factor as well, complexity, more and more regulation. So it's not a pretty time. So there are a few things that we're focused on and thinking about that just as sort of I could go forever on these, but I'll try to be very concise. One is just how do you build around that kind of agility and resilience? So what is a more agile model? Frankly, the NGO model of the past was not very agile, and almost the way the funding mechanisms work, the grant cycles, et cetera. So how can we be more adaptable and build platforms of technology and teams that are kind of fit for purpose when they go, as opposed to these big, heavy, kind of approaches. We are also seeing with the respect of different kinds of partnerships. For instance, I'll give you a few examples where a number of people are talking about how with the very horrible imperative we face around climate, that now a lot of focus is shifting. And I was observing over the years, I worked on that at McKinsey for a while, and like now we have these two parallel universes. There's global health and development over here, and the climate, and they were like not connecting, and yet the fundamental issue is the same. So the head of the Nature Conservancy and I sat down and said, this is crazy. We're working on fundamentally the same problem. It's different manifestations of the same problem, and unfortunately, it will. The impact will disproportionately impact the women and poor women. I mean, if you look at the numbers in both health and development and climate. So we've actually said, well, why don't, instead of us like da-da-da, why don't we come together? We put together a bridge collaborative, which we're really calling the Bridge Collaborative. He and I spent actually Friday together in Paris, where we're actually working on how do we bring together data models, insights, and where actually health and climate are actually seen as more in a we work together in that area. So I think part of this is adapting to these new realities. A couple others I might mention really quick, and then is we are actually thinking about how do you shift the business. Everybody keeps talking about it. It's all about the business model. It's all about, well, first of all, somebody who's run businesses and built businesses, there's not such thing as one business model. I mean, these are just a bunch of different levers you pull and push to make, businesses run, and these are complicated businesses to run. But, we are actually, doing a whole bunch of stuff to test new ways to operationalize ourselves. So we've set up new local entities in some countries, like in India, where we can function on, with local money and more local support. We've actually started some fee-for-service businesses. We've created a capacity, since we have a big research capability and clinical trial capability, to do sponsored research for people. So we've actually had an interesting collaboration with a bunch of Silicon Valley investors on a particular drug program that, how do we actually think about new mechanisms to sustain this important work that we believe needs to continue even in an environment where there's not enough. And then finally, we can go on, and I understand there was quite a bit of conversation, but I am, unapologetic about the opportunities for data and digital transformation in our space. They're not going to cure everything. I've been in meetings where I had to remind people that maybe chemistry and biology still matter in health, but a little bit. But that said, I think if you actually look at the next 5 to 10 years on a sort of forward-looking basis as to what will really change the outcome, it will be around the way data and digital work. And I don't mean the cool new app. I mean understanding communities differently and giving them more power to, actually it will do 2 or 3 things that I think we've struggled with forever. How do we integrate services so we don't have so many stovepipe silos? Actually, data models are actually going to bring us together. In health, we're already seeing some of that because we're integrating the way we address patients through a more integrated approach. But it also is an enormous tool, and it will increasingly, while there's currently a big divide around gender and data, we are actually seeing the opportunities, at least, for actually bringing them together, and I think it will help. So I'm cautious. I know that we've got to deal with mitigating factors, but I'm wildly supportive. We entered, the Director General of the WHO and I announced a couple of months ago a partnership between PATH and WHO to help to support a digital transformation strategy in countries, in member states around Africa and Asia, and I'm very excited about the work we can do to help support that.
Great. Well, I think we're just about out of time, but I think, Steve, perhaps inadvertently, you brought us completely full circle back to where we started this morning, which I think is great. I thought Marty Koistra's talk about the importance of network leadership and the importance of collaboration to solve wicked problems was such a great message to start the day. And Steve, you've ended us with both lots of good examples of how you and PATH are doing that, and also a sense of optimism about some things that we need to look forward to in the coming years, despite some challenging times. So thanks so much, Steve, and I'm going to invite Kristen back up on stage.